Hello again. My name's Charles Sabo, and I'm back doing another teaching video. I'm currently doing videos on the book that I've written called Joel, Zephaniah, Zechariah, 3 Bible Commentaries. I've already done teaching videos on the book of Joel as well as the book of Zephaniah, and you can see them posted here on YouTube. You can also find the first 8 chapters of Zechariah posted on YouTube currently. Today I'm in chapter 9, and I'm going to scroll down to chapter 9. This is a PDF file from the book, and so I'm going to scroll down to chapter 9 to get ready. And I just want to say, if you have questions after the video or during it or what have you, go ahead and ask them here in the comments down below. I'll definitely respond back, and feel free to hit thumbs up on liking this video. I beg you to do it. It'd be nice to have you do it. And then if you want to subscribe to my channel to get further updates on what's happening with my videos. And so here we are, chapter 9, and so I'm going to start with verse 1. So I didn't go into an introduction to the chapter. Maybe I should, but if you're watching the videos, and you'll see that each chapter carries on to the next chapter. So we're going to go right into verse 1, and I'll explain to you the setting that we're in and so forth. So, and briefly, Zechariah and Haggai are the prophets that the returned remnant are being educated or spoken to through the Lord speaking through them, And so Zechariah has written his 14-chapter book explaining what the Lord has brought him to tell the people of the returned remnant that are going back. They're building the temple, and so in chapter 8 we found that the temple was finished after 4 years of construction, from the 2nd year of the reign of Darius II to the 6th year of the reign of Darius II. So if you're interested in more on that, I think I have a place down here, and I think it's verse 9 or verse 10. It goes back into that a little bit, so we'll go there. Now first I'll read chapter 1. The burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, when the eyes of man, as of all the tribes of Israel, shall be toward the Lord. Okay. Now formerly Hadrach was a place east of Damascus. Zechariah brought a prophecy, word of the Lord, concerning Damascus, including the insignificant location east of the world's oldest city. The location of Hadrach and Damascus shall be the resting place, is what he said, right? And then that's what he meant by resting place. That's the Hebrew word. And then it would be the resting place for Alexander the Great and his Macedonian Greek army when they were to march through the Holy Land. The eyes of men, as well as the tribes of Israel, would see the Lord's hand at work, shall be toward the Lord, right? They'll see the Lord's hand at work as Alexander the Great goes through the land of Hadrach and Damascus. That's the resting place as he marches towards the Philistia seacoast. It's very interesting as we go through this. Okay. The burden was not so much against Damascus, right? There was not a burden against Hadrach and Damascus. There was just to be the resting place. But the locations mentioned in the following verses will have the burdens, right? As was known from the earlier prophets, the cities of the Philistines and former Phoenician seaports were going to be faced with the wrath of God. And you can read about this further in Isaiah, Ezekiel, as well as Zephaniah. Now, if you saw the Zephaniah videos, the teaching videos on Zephaniah, kind of gives you a preview of what we're talking about here. Now, when the Macedon Greek military was to roll through, that would be in 332 BC, the people would know that the God of heaven was fulfilling what he had declared. All right. Now, he declared it through Zephaniah, who was sometime before that. His existence was like a generation before Zechariah. And Hamath also shall border thereby Tyrus and Sidon, there it be very wise. Though it be very wise. I'm sorry. I'll explain what that means. I do have a tendency of saying what I think it says. Alexander the Great and the Greek Macedonian military marched through Hamath at the Aramaean north border, then proceeded down through Sidon and the islands of Tyre. Even though the Hamath and Sidon seaports had endured through the Assyrian and Babylonian aggressions of the past, their wisdoms were not going to bring them advantage due to their unfamiliarity with the Greeks and Macedonians. See, remember, the Babylonians and Assyrians lived right up the road from them, but not Greece and Macedon. The Macedonians, no. Though it be very wise is why it says that, because they thought they're wise because they've survived through the Assyrian and Babylonians. Well, Alexander the Great was going to teach them a lesson. The Lord is going to teach them a lesson, actually, through Alexander. However, mainland Tyre did not endure the Nebuchadnezzar siege and was scraped clean of any trace of the city. So that left the island of Tyre, while the mainland Tyre was scraped clean by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army. It was the island of Tyre that became their place of refuge during the Babylonian siege of the mainland, right? The island. Here we go, verse 3. And Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust, and fine gold as the mire of the streets. Now, be still, ye inhabitants of the isle, though whom the merchants of the Sidon that pass over the sea have replenished. Isaiah 23:2 says. So in Isaiah, he was prophesying of the island that was replenishing the sea coast, the people where the people have fled, with supplies, because they didn't have supplies. The island of Tyre was remote, could not be reached by any military force. Therefore, they were safe and could successfully do business. Tyre consisted of two pieces of land, one area off main shoreline of now Lebanon, and the second was an island about 800 meters off the mainland shore. Now here's a map. Okay, sorry about my camera view, but I'll go up and down a little bit so you can kind of pause your video and see the map, right? Okay, so there's old mainland Tyre right here on the left side, right side, excuse me, and then the island of Tyre. All right. Now, Isaiah 23:2 speaks to the inhabitants of the island offshore. God had instructed them to be still. This is in reference to the inhabitants having fled from the mainland for safety when the Babylonians had come to destroy Tyrus of the mainland. They would be still in safety as they were provided a replenishment of food and necessities by the ships of Sidon, which was located 400 meters north of mainland Tyre. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon sieged mainland Tyre between 586 and 573 BC. The event which the inhabitants of the island of Tyre had fled would be both the Assyrian aggression and the 13-year siege of mainland Tyre of Babylon, right? Because the 13-year siege of the mainland by Babylon, they were replenished by the ships of Sidon. Amazingly, Isaiah had prophesied of what had later come to pass with precision, right? Isaiah was prophesying around 700 BC, and he prophesied it precisely. I did a Bible commentary on the Book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters. It came out in publication this past January. Feel free to pick it up. It is actually a college textbook. All right. Now, the Bible was provided the reason God had brought his wrath upon Tyrus within Ezekiel 26. The children of Judah had sought out refuge from Tyre during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem. All right, and I'll read you something from Ezekiel 26:2. Son of man, because that Tyrus has said against Jerusalem, aha, she is broken that was the gates of the people, she is turned unto me, I shall replenish, now she is laid waste, right? So Tyre had an attitude. Because Tyre had laughed at the desperation of the fleeing children of Israel who came to the Tyre for replenishment, they fell and were laid waste. So they came to Tyre for help, and the Tyrians did not help them. Ezekiel 26 verses 3 through 5. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyrus, and will cause many nations to come up against you, as the sea causes his waves to come up. And they shall destroy the walls of Tyrus and break down her towers. And I will also scrape her dust from her and make her like the top of a rock. And it shall be a place for the spreading of nets in the midst of the sea. For I have spoken it, saith the Lord God, and it shall become a spoil to the nations. Now, this is Ezekiel prophesying what's going to happen to mainland Tyre, which was fulfilled by Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonian military. So notice in Ezekiel 26:3, God declared that he will cause many nations to come against Tyre. By the time Ezekiel had written this, Assyria had already been there. Babylon would come with their allies, the Chaldees, the Syrians, the Moabites, and Ammonites. You can find that in 2 Kings 24:2. Later, the fall of the island of Tyre was to be inflicted by Greece and Alexander the Great. God represented this destruction to be in waves and not a single surge or event, when he declared that it would be as the sea causes its waves. The sea causes its waves to come up. So it came in waves through different conquests, different empires through the centuries. Ezekiel 26:4 was accomplished by the Babylonian wave. Between 586 and 573 BC, Nebuchadnezzar scraped the land clean, where a city no longer existed, which caused the island to be without its ships from the mainland, which caused them to seek Sidon for replenishment. The desolation became a place where the fishermen spread their nets coming from the sea. Nebuchadnezzar was not intended to seize the island, though he may have tried by ship. Since the defense would be stronger from a land defense, with catapults seeking the main ships sent out, the island of Tyre held the defense of the island city from the wave of the siege. All right? And Tyrus did not build herself, and Tyrus did build herself a stronghold. The stronghold was on the island. The island of Tyre became the main seaport to the Mediterranean Sea, which ships from as far west as Tarshish, which is in Spain, would sail into her ports. The wealth of Tyrus was heaped up as dirt, while her military defenses were devastating to any fleet of ships who might attempt to besiege her. Now think of their wealth. It's like dust. They had so much wealth. It was just like they were flowing with wealth. All right, verse 4. Behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fire. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great brought the Greek army to the shores of Tyre. They built up the land bridge across the 800-meter bay of water which separated the island of Tyre from the mainland. They invaded the island of Tyre and totally destroyed it. Now, and that's all history now. So this is prophesied before it happened, right? Right? 332 BC is when it happened. Zechariah existed in the 5th century BC, right? All right. Verse 5. Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza also shall see it and be sorrowful, and Ekron, for her expectation shall be ashamed, and the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. Now, we read something in chapter 2 of Zephaniah about this. All right, so I'm going to read you verse 4 of Zephaniah 2. Zephaniah 2, sorry. And forgive me if I make that mistake here. I want to speak quicker than I can think. I think quicker than I can speak. I can't enunciate as quick as I'm thinking. Sorry about that, boy. There I go. Now, for Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. That's what verse 4 of Zephaniah 2 says. Now, the most important fact that the four cities in Zephaniah 2:4 is that, the most important fact is that whenever one fell to a world power, eventually all would fall and be ruled by that power. All were under Canaanite control from 2300 BC until 1000 BC, when it was defeated and controlled by Israel. In 730 BC, it was taken by the Assyrians. Then in 609 BC, Egypt defeated the ancient Philistia Strip, while on their way back from defeating Israel at Megiddo. That's in Jeremiah 47:1. In 606 BC, Pharaoh Necho in Egypt was defeated by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon at the Battle of Carchemish. You can find that here. Now, afterward, the Medes and the Persians defeated Babylon. Then Alexander the Great besieged and captured Gaza in 332 BC. The ancient Philistia Strip changed hands regularly between the two Greek kingdoms, the Seleucids of Syria and the Ptolemies of Egypt, until it was besieged and taken by the Hasmoneans in 96 BC. The ancient Philistine coastline was conquered eventually by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, the Crusaders, and the Ottoman Turks. Though Gaza has been attacked and destroyed many times throughout the last 2,700 years, it has never been forgotten as a city. Though Ascalon has probably been left desolate by several of its conquerors, the desolation will someday coincide with Gaza being forgotten. Because it is so hot in that region, the militaries historically would sleep during the heat of the day. The prophecy of this Ashdod noonday attack implies that it will be abrupt and unanticipated. This abrupt attack may coincide with the Ekron attack, since it is joined together by the conjunction "and" in Zephaniah 2:4. Here's a map. There's the Philistia coastline on the left of the map, right? Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, and Raphia. Raphia is not mentioned. When one pulls a plant by its roots, the plant will no longer exist in that soil. Therefore, the city of Ekron will have been removed from being a city. The city of Ekron existed until King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had destroyed it in the late 7th century BC. From that destruction, the city has ceased from existence. This seems to be the only one of the 4 Philistine cities mentioned in this prophecy that can actually be pinpointed exactly to one past conqueror. That was Zephaniah. Now, Zephaniah prophesied that before Nebuchadnezzar had even come into Israel, so to siege Israel. So this is all pertaining to the Zephaniah prophecy that I'm reading to you. Because of the commentary I did on Zephaniah, I'm able to pull that and bring it in here to show you history and the prophecies that Zephaniah had proclaimed. The Zechariah 9:5 prophecy revealed that the Philistine seacoast would be watching Alexander the Great and his army spend months of labor moving boulders and soil into the bay between mainland Tyre and the island of Tyre. Zechariah prophesied of the spectators down the seacoast watching the activity. They had yet to experience the return at devastation because the Greek Macedonian army was preoccupied with their endeavor in besieging the island of Tyre. So that's why he said, Ashkelon shall see it and fear, Gaza shall see it and be sorrowful. Right? Oh, we're next. Oh, when they wait till they get done there, we're next. So Ekron was not the city it was after the Babylonians destroyed it. It was a small village who watched the movements of Alexander the Great and his army. The translators used the word expectation for the Hebrew word mabat, which actually is defined as object of hope. The translators have also used the word ashamed for the Hebrew word yabesh, which is actually defined as withered. Zechariah declared that the little village of Ekron's, her expectation, her about hope, to come back as a flourishing city was yabash, withered, right? They were hoping they could bring it back to being a city, but their hope withered when they saw Alexander up the seacoast destroying Tyre, island of Tyre. Oh boy, we're doomed, is what they were, the Ekron little village, as they watched the Greek Macedonian military destroy the island of Tyre up the coast from them. Because Gaza probably put up a fight against Alexander's army, the king of Gaza was probably killed, and the king shall perish from Gaza, right? And And as Alexander rolled through the Philistine seaport, he most assuredly left behind desolation, which included Ashkelon. Its inhabitation was probably a part of that desolation. Because of its real estate value, it probably did not take long for Ashkelon to rebuild back to a habitable city, under the Seleucids years later. The Seleucids obviously ruled with peace after they conquered, and so they built up the cities from there. And Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. Now, it probably was uninhabited after Alexander defeated it, right? Shall not be inhabited. But the value, the real estate value of that sea coast, every empire that owns it is going to make it flourish, right? So they brought it back. But it shall not be inhabited after Alexander gets a hold of it, right? Then the Seleucids would build it back up. Now, and a bastard shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. Typically, a bastard is a fatherless boy or man whose father had become deceased. The prophecy here is that the city of Ashdod will be inhabited by fatherless boys and men, because the Greek Macedonian military will have killed their fathers, right? The pride of the Philistines has always been their seaports and the harbors, in which one could buy and sell all merchandise of the world. The economies of the seaports became desolate after the invasions, right? Now, like I said, the Seleucids came in and built it back up probably a century later. Now, I will read you verse 7. I will take away his blood out of his mouth and his abominations from between his teeth, but he that remains, even he, shall be for our God, and he shall be as a governor in Judah and Ekron as a Jebusite. This is a great prophecy, and nobody has understood this the way I have seen it. The Lord shows me. I know history, I've studied it, and I know who this is pertaining to. You're going to be amazed. All right? Like we were talking about the Seleucids, right? Well, the Seleucids, all the way the Antiochuses, Antiochus the first, second, third, fourth, all that, the Seleucids. The religious ceremonies of the Philistine seacoast was typically the worship of Baal and other gods, such as Dagon. It was typical of their worship to mix blood and swine fat in their drink offerings. King David wrote of the abominations within Psalm 16:4, and I'll read you that. Right here. Their sorrows shall be multiplied that hasten after another god. They drink offerings of blood will I not offer, nor take up their names into my lips. That's David writing this. Now, the Lord declared that he would remove the blood out of the teeth of the Philistines, as well as his abominations between his teeth. Right? Ezekiel also wrote of this during Israel's time in captivity. Remember that? The abominations between his teeth? The blood between his teeth. All right. So let's read about what Ezekiel said about this. Wherefore, saying to them, Thus saith the Lord God, You eat with the blood, and lift up your eyes toward your idols, and shed blood, and shall you possess the land? Question that Ezekiel asked. I'm not going to go into the theology on that. It just shows you more prophecy. Ezekiel was focused on Israel's abomination, which had been influenced by the Philistines in their west border. Right? He was talking about Israel picking up their abominations, their traditions of Baal worship. Remember, they were destroyed by that. That was during Ezekiel's time. Babylonian captivity had not happened yet. So Ezekiel, there was one of the sieges of Babylonian captivity, but Jerusalem wasn't destroyed yet. So Ezekiel's still prophesying, even though he was in captivity with them, or at least went and visited the captivity. Since verse 7, I haven't done a commentary on Ezekiel, so I'm going by what I've heard, what I've learned. I'll eventually do one on Ezekiel. That's where I learn the most, is when I do the commentaries. I just break it down word for word. Since verse 7 begins with the conjunction and, it is in addition to the previous verse. In addition to removing the pride from the Philistines of their seaports, God proclaimed that he would remove the idolatrous ceremony of their drink offerings and eating of blood from their religious activities. Upon their destruction at the hands of the Greek Macedonian military, Hellenism became their religion until the days of the Hasmoneans. You can read about that in 1 Maccabees 5:68. Now, I'm starting to quote the Maccabees. The Maccabees are not the Word of God, but they are very accurate history books. These are written of the events during these times. They are very much in detail, and very, from what I understand, I can see, it's accurate, because they do confirm some things that the Bible has said will happen and has happened. So I read from Maccabees as a history book. All right. Judaism then moved into their cultural belief system. Thus, drinking of blood was an abomination. Though Herod had inflicted Hellenism back onto the community during the time of Christ's first visit, Christianity became the most influential religion from that time on. Right? But he that remains, even he shall be for our God. So, when the Hasmoneans took over, the Hellenism fell by the wayside, and Christianity, first it was Judaism, followed by Christianity. But he that remains in that area, even he shall be for our God. They were going to become Christians eventually, right? First, they were going to be Judaic. They're going to be of the old covenant first, before Christ even came. All right, the Hasmoneans during their time. Now, the Hasmoneans had been in rule over Judea since the rebellion against Antiochus Epiphanes IV of Syria in 164 BC, which led initially to Matthias Jehoiarib of the Hasmonean family, which was led. Now, Matthias Jehoiarib, I can never pronounce this, and I'm sorry, of the Hasmon family. Now, he was the founder of the Maccabees, right? So, shortly after the revolt against Antiochus IV began, Matthias died, and his son Judas led the rebellion, along with his 4 brothers. Judas was known as Judas Maccabeus, and had become the military governing ruler over Judah. All right? Judas, his father, Matthias Jehoiarib, died in 166 BC, was a Jewish priest and landowner of Modin. This is now known as Modin Maccabean Route. This parcel of land was only 7 miles east of the suspected location of ancient Ekron. Understanding that the Lord converted the coastal cities of the Philistines over to Judaism, it can be a safe conclusion that the governor being prophesied of in Zechariah 9:7 is Judas Maccabeus. And he shall be as a governor in Judah, is the prophecy. It's Judas Maccabeus. Judas Maccabeus, okay? I can't think of a better way to say his name. Because Judaism became prevalent in the seacoast, the people of the small village of Ekron were merely incorporated into Israel, just as the Jebusites were when King David defeated Jerusalem. All right, you can see that in 2 Samuel 5:6-9 and 24:16-18. And Ekron as a Jebusite. See that? So the Lord is predicting that Ekron's going to be like the Jebusites. The Jebusites, after David defeated Jerusalem, became part of Jerusalem and its citizens. Ekron, after the Maccabees became dominant, became part of Judaic religion, Judaism, because of that. So Ekron was just as a Jebusite. The Hasmonean dynasty began with the Matthias Jehoiarib revolt with his 5 sons, and thus the Hasmonean family ruled over Judea until the time of Christ. The Hasmoneans did. Wait a minute now, didn't the Romans? Well, I wrote a research paper on the Hasmonean dynasty, and believe it or not, Herod the Great was part of that dynasty. He married one of the Hasmoneans. So his wife was a Hasmonean. When Jonathan, who was Judas's brother, I'm reading you something right now from 93. Oh, here we go. This is from Flavius Josephus, the great Jewish historian. When Jonathan, who was Judas's brother, succeeded him, he behaved himself with a great circumspection in other respects, with relation to his own people, and he collaborated his authority by preserving his friendship with the Romans. He also made a league with Antiochus the son, yet was not all this sufficient for his security, for the tyrant Typho, who was guardian to Antiochus' son, laid a plot against him, and besides that endeavor to take off his friends, and caught Jonathan by a while, and he was going to Ptolemais to Antiochus with a few persons in his company, and put him in bonds, and then made an expedition against the Jews. But when he was afterward driven away by Simon, who was Jonathan's brother, and was enraged at his defeat, he put Jonathan to death. Now, why am I reading this? Well, this gives you some history of what was going on during this time. All right. Jonathan seemed to waver his friendship towards Rome and brought the Hasmoneans to be more of the Hellenistic religion, which was opposed by Judaism. After Jonathan's death, his brother Simon then took over leadership of Judea. According to Flavius Josephus, Simon was succeeded by his son John Hyrcanus, who was later succeeded by his son Aristobulus. Aristobulus changed the government into a kingdom and was the first who would put a crown on his head. This was 471 years and 3 months after the Jews were sent free from the Babylonian captivity. I need to capitalize captivity here. Aristobulus, after he imprisoned his mother and other siblings, shared his reign of the kingdom with his brother Antigonus, and of whom he loved greatly. Upon rumors of the plot by Antigonus against him by members of households, Aristobulus had arranged the murder of Antigonus. Being full of remorse for his loss of his brother, he fully greatly sickened with eternal bleeding and died, as Josephus put it, by some supernatural providence. Josephus implies this because it was the exact location which Antigonus had been slain. Right? So, look at that. Antigonus' brother died in the same place he had slain his brother. Aristobulus' wife freed the king's brother and made Alexander Janus the king, who reigned 27 years over Judea. Because the Hellenization had been manifesting over the people, the Sadducees were then a movement who supported this religion, which originated back from the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. The Sadducees had supported Alexander Janus, which brought rebellion against the Pharisees and Essenes. This rebellion brought a civil war between the two sects of citizens. During this time, Alexander appointed Antipater, father of Herod the Great, military governor over the Edomite province. See where this is coming in? After the death, the Hasmoneans were deeply rooted with the Romans and, believe it or not, the Edomites, because Antipater was an Edomite, father of Herod the Great. He was an Edomite, land of Edomia. Military governor over the Edomia. No, I'm sorry. I should just keep reading, and I'll come to what I'm trying to say. After the death of Alexander Janus, his wife Alexandra Solon took over his reign and ruled over the Judeans for 9 years. I'm giving you from this paper that I wrote so you can understand some of the power exchanges that went on in Judea during this time. Queen Alexandra gave control back to the Pharisees, much to the chagrin of the Sadducees. She built up Judean troops to 150% and became a significant power over the surrounding countries. She had 2 sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. Upon her deathbed, she gave the kingdom over to Hyrcanus II. Aristobulus II was a more dominant individual and challenged Hyrcanus II to battle for rule of the kingdom. Hyrcanus II humbly stepped down from the throne and gave it over to his brother, while maintaining his other royal dignities. Now, Hyrcanus was influenced by Antipater of Idumea to go to Nabatea and plead with King Aretas so that he would support Hyrcanus in getting his kingdom back. Antipater saw an opportunity to rule Judea through a puppet like Hyrcanus. With the Arabian troops outnumbering Aristobulus, Cyrus of Rome heard that he might obtain booty from Aristobulus when he would hire him for protection. When Cyrus arrived, both brothers attempted to bribe him for help. Cyrus, representing Pompey the Great, favored Hyrcanus, believing that Aristobulus was more of a risk for rebellion. With the decision to invite Rome to become involved in their dispute, they were really giving up their sovereignty over of the Judean kingdom. That was the big mistake. That's how Rome became rulers over Judea, was through these events. So you're learning some history that you go, why did Rome rule over Judea during the time of Christ? This is why. Many battles were fought, which eventually led, I need to fix that to led, to victory by Pompey the Great. I have some typos in here, some corrections to make still, and I will be doing them. I acknowledge them here, and then if I I'll watch the video and catch those mistakes later. After Pompey was dead, Antipater changed sides and cultivated a friendship with Caesar. And Antigonus II, the son of Aristobulus II, came to Caesar and pleaded for mercy as he accused Hyrcanus II and Antipater of driving his people out of their country. He also accused that they were acting unjustly and extravagantly with relation to their nation. After Antipater revealed his war scars to Caesar, revealing his sacrifices that he made for Caesar, Caesar awarded Hyrcanus the position of high priest of Judea and gave Antipater his choice of kingdoms. Antipater chose Judea, right? This is the father of Herod the Great. You get it? Herod the Great was born 73 BC as one of the 4 sons of Antipater, king of Idumea, and later Judea. Antipater, son of Antipas, married a woman named Cypros, who was from an ancient family of Arabia. She bore him his 4 sons, and there's the name of the 4 sons, right? And a daughter, right? Herod being one of them. Idumea was the land south of Judea, which had been seized by warrior high priest Hyrcanus I, whose pagan residents had become converted to Judaism. All right. Amid those residents and converts had been Antipater's father Antipas, who was Herod's grandfather. Antipas, having been an Idumean tribal leader, was appointed governor by Hyrcanus I in order to avoid rebelliousness in this new province of Judea. After Antipas died young, Antipater inherited Antipas's rank and position, appointed by Queen Alexandra of Judea, one of the Hasmoneans. She was the Hasmonean queen, remember? After a failed Parthian plot to overthrow Phasaelus and Hyrcanus II, the Parthians in Jerusalem betook themselves to plundering in hopes to raise Aristobulus II to be king. Hyrcanus was bound as prisoner, while Phasaelus dashed his head upon a rock and died a historic death as the Parthians proceeded to demolish the cities of Marissa. It is also reported that before he expired, he was informed by a certain poor woman how Herod had escaped out of their hands, and that he said thereupon, I now die with comfort, since I leave behind me one alive that will avenge me of mine enemies. This is Herod the Great's brother who died and said this, right? So Herod went to Arabia in pursuit of money for help to preserve his brother's life. Before he found that he had died, he found Malichus with a short memory of the relationship which he had and his father had, desperate for his situation in Judea, and finding out of his brother's death, Herod sailed to Rome to appeal to Antony for help. Upon his petition to Caesar Augustus, and Antony, they felt compassion for Herod because they remembered his loyalty and heroism, which he had accomplished along with his perseverance in many difficult times. Caesar and Antony together declared Herod king of Judah and held a festival in honor of his first day of his reign. Now, after leaving his first wife Doris behind, Herod the Great married Miriam, who was the daughter of Alexander and Alexandra. Alexander was the son of Aristobulus II, and Alexandra was the daughter of Hyrcanus II. So she was a Hasmonean. Miriam's brother was Aristobulus III. Though Herod was not the Hasmonean bloodline, he was heavily related to and entrenched in the Hasmonean governorship of Judea. Okay, so if you hadn't known about this before, that is how Herod became ruler over Judea. Okay, so that's the politics all behind it. That's why this is being prophesied 4 centuries earlier by Zechariah. Verse 8 of Zechariah 9, "And I will encamp about my house, and because of the army, because of him that passes by, and because of him that returns, and no oppressor shall pass through them any more. For now have I seen with my eyes." This verse is an addition and to the previous verse. The Lord had made a statement here concerning the oppressive governing of his house, Zion. The verse is completely messianic and set for the Lord's second coming. Jerusalem will be the place which he will sit and rule the kingdoms of the world. I will encamp about my house. The word encamp is in direct context to the Lord's future protection of Jerusalem and his people. As a military lays a complete siege of a city, so the Lord will completely siege his property. The reason is then spoken in this verse, this following phrase, because of the military forces, him who passes by on through the city, and those who keep coming back, returns to his city, Jerusalem, to oppress his people. Right? The reason. That's the reason. That's because they kept coming through and oppressing his people. How many times did the Ptolemies come through and oppress Jerusalem? How many times did the Seleucids come through and oppress the people? The only one that didn't oppress the people of Jerusalem was Antiochus III. He was like a king to them. They practically worshiped the man. The Lord then made a promise, which he will fulfill upon his second coming, and no oppressor shall pass through them anymore. He will not allow any more oppression to fall upon Jerusalem, nor his people, which are of his eternal kingdom. The Lord has witnessed the oppression by the oppressors and has promised to protect his oppressed people during the time stated previous to his second coming. All right. Isaiah 11:4 says, "But the righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with iniquity All right, let me start over. "But with righteousness shall he, Jesus, judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall smite the earth," Jesus will, "with the rod of his mouth," the word of God, "and with the breath of his lips, and he shall slay the wicked." All right, do you remember Revelation 19? Out came a sharp sword, two-edged sword. The works yet to be fulfilled are still within Isaiah 61:2, as Jesus did not say that it was fulfilled on that day. Isaiah 11:4 reveals the same wrath that Revelation 19:15 reveals. He will smite the nations with the sword rod of his mouth. The day of vengeance is to comfort those who mourn, which has yet to come. Isaiah 61:2b. Upon the completion of his vengeance, he will rule with a rod of iron. Revelation 19:15. God's power is not waving a magic wand, nor even his hand. It is simply spoken from the breath of his mouth. All right? And God said is all that he had to do in the beginning to create the entire universe. He said something. He said, "Let there be light," and he created time. Let there be the waters of the deeps of the earth and what have you. I mean, he said it all. He didn't wave a wand or anything. With the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. Right? He's not going to need any weapons besides his own words. Verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, the king comes unto you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. This is really getting good, huh? The prophet wrote of the extreme joy which the children of God, daughter of Zion, shall feel as they realize that their Messiah and Savior is to be seen entering into Jerusalem. To rejoice is the realization of what he will do, has done, in preparation to fulfill their salvation. To rejoice greatly commands there to be no limits to their joy. God never exhorts his people to rejoice in the worldly joys, but to sing with unfathomable jubilee songs of his salvation and mercy. All right, Psalm 103, 1 through 5. Bless the Lord, O my soul. I think I've sang this. You're not going to hear me sing it this time. And all that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all of his benefits. Who forgives all your iniquities? Your iniquities. Who heals all your diseases? Who redeems your life from destruction? Who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercies? Who satisfies your mouth with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles? Who is it? It's the Lord. To shout during the worship in Jubilee is what the daughter of Jerusalem would feel as they sing songs with extreme gladness. The king is coming unto her, riding into Jerusalem. He's not just a king, but your king. Your long-awaited king has arrived. Psalm 101 through 2 says, make joyful noise unto the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. All right, you could say this is kind of more millennial kingdom type, but still, this verse is about singing for joy because he's entering in the first time. He is a just judge who has brought with him his salvation. Isaiah 33:22 says, for the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. He will save us. In true faith, God's children shall proclaim for all of the righteous their faith in the Lord. God's people trust in God that he is their judge, he is their lawgiver, and he is their king. Zechariah brought to the attention that the king, which the children of God are to rejoice over, is coming to them lowly. In the Hebrew, that word lowly is ani, I guess. This means to say that he is riding into Jerusalem poor, afflicted, and humble. By no means does this mean that he is lowly in mind without being lowly in his condition. I'll read you something, Isaiah 53:4. Surely he hath borne our griefs, carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Right? Jesus, who is the awaited Messiah, called himself meek and lowly in heart. That's in Matthew 11:29. His lowliness was to be an example of his humility, which he was to preach to his children. Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That's why he comes in lowly. In addition to being lowly, and he will come to Jerusalem riding upon an ass, a donkey. In addition to, and being lowly and riding upon an ass, he is also riding upon a colt, which is the foal of an ass. Now the translators have used the word foal for the Hebrew word ben, which means son of. Now, son of or offspring of. With this context, the two animals are tied together, with the foal colt following his mother. The young foal, too young to be able to tread on his own, but needs to still be led by his mother. The world has seen its kings riding upon white stallions to exalt themselves to their glorified entry into their cities. Unlike the kings of the earth, the lowly King of glory shall ride into Jerusalem on the foal in humility. Is that good? The day being prophesied was the glorious entry into Jerusalem by the Lord Jesus Christ on what is known as Palm Sunday. God provided Israel with the exact day that Messiah would ride in Jerusalem in Daniel 9:25. The Pharisees and elders of Israel already had figured out that the day was coming, and they knew enough to be able to realize that exact day. After the destruction of the first temple, a prophecy of the new temple was revealed to the prophet Daniel. The Messiah was to appear to Israel based on the decree to rebuild the second temple. The decree to rebuild this temple was prophesied by Isaiah, which had even named King Cyrus as the one who would command the decree. Isaiah 44:28 says, "Thus saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundation shall be laid." In Daniel 9:25, the Lord was specific of the timing of his entry into Jerusalem. I'll read you Daniel 9:25. "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times." Many misinterpret this too. Many theologians have rejected Cyrus as the one that gave the initial commandment of Daniel 9:25, because it was 569 years from the commandment until the Messiah was to be cut off, crucified. This is a difference of 77 Julian calendar years. Many can understand that the 77 years of rest, Jeremiah 29:10-14, which Israel had denied the land, did not happen in consecutive years, adding up to the full 490 years. 70 weeks of years, 70 times 7, 490 years. So one should be able to understand that there may have been a gap between the first 7 weeks and the other 62 weeks. Notice he first says 7 weeks, which is 7 times 7. 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7, 49 years. A week of years is 7 years. And 62 weeks is 60. A score is 20, so 3 score is 60, and 2, 62 weeks. He's listing them separately, right? Okay, that's my point. Since this prophecy has a separate periods, it is obvious that God had meant for a gap as well between the 69th week and the 70th week. This is very obvious since we live almost 2,000 years since the conclusion of the 69th week, and we still have not seen the beginning of the 70th week, right? Okay, Daniel addressed Cyrus in the last verse of Daniel chapter 1 because Daniel continued until the first year that Cyrus made the commandment. This was the same year Gaburu, or Darius the Mede, started to reign as well. Now Daniel 1:21 states, "And Daniel continued even to the first year of King Cyrus." It is more acceptable for this since the 70 years was to expire within 3 years of this prophecy, and it would be another 91 years until 445 BC when Artaxerxes I would make his commandment. All right, it was Artaxerxes in verse 25. If it was Artaxerxes in Daniel 9:25, this would make God a liar, since the captivity was to only be for 70 years, as per Jeremiah 29:10-14. God's not a liar. Therefore, they needed to be able to be back to rebuild right after the expiration of the 70 years. The Artaxerxes command would bring the captivity lasting 158 years. You people that say Artaxerxes was the one, come on. The building of the second temple began shortly after the decree by Cyrus. That's per the word of God. God told you. Back in Isaiah, where was it? I'm got to slow down here. Where did he say it? Isaiah 44:28. Unbelievable. All right. The building of the second temple began shortly after the decree by Cyrus. Amazingly, the temple was finished in 416 BC and dedicated in 415 BC. Now, if you saw my videos on chapter 7 and 8, you'll understand. Which puts it 121 years later after the decree by Cyrus from 536 BC. 121 years later. Right? Okay, so why did it take 121 years? Well, there was a 70-year interim period between the 7th and 8th weeks of this prophecy. During this time, the Jews were challenged by the surrounding Cuthian and Samaritans, who made it very difficult for the construction of the walls and gates of Jerusalem. That's Nehemiah 2 and 4. And if you saw chapter 7 video, that's where I explain this. This troublous time was also burdened with the cleansing of those Jews who intermarried themselves with strange wives or non-Israelite women. I think that was in Zechariah 8, by the way. The Zechariah 8 video. I'm having a hard time remembering. God may have taken a 70-year time out until the troublous times were finished. The first 7 weeks of years, 49 years, began in 536 BC when King Cyrus of Persia made the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. 536 minus 49 years equals 486 BC, which the 70 weeks prophecy halted. The Lord embarked a 70-year timeout from the 70 weeks prophecy of Daniel 9:24-27. This was the first year of the reign of King Ahasuerus, who is Xerxes I. All right, 486, 465 BC. Now, Xerxes I, King Ahasuerus, was married to Queen Esther. I don't know if you remember reading the Book of Esther. Now, the construction of the temple was officially stopped on the year 465 BC. Notice it's the last year that he was in reign. Of King Artaxerxes I, who they are all saying stated the decree to build the temple. Give me a break. He halted the construction of the temple his first year of his rule, as per Ezra 4:7-24. Please make note that Bishlam, Meredath, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions had waited until King Ahasuerus was dead until they wrote his successor, King Artaxerxes I. King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes I, not Artaxerxes I, but Xerxes I, was the husband of Queen Esther, who had brought favor to the Jews in the Book of Esther. You can read that. And the days of the biblical years were 360-day years. Then we must calculate from the time of King Cyrus's decree to the time of the 70-year interim period correctly. Since the Julian calendar began its use in 46 BC, it designated the days of each year to be 365 days, including its calculations to the years before Christ. So all those history books were Julian calendar years, so-and-so BC. They didn't have BC back in BC. So the Julian calendar, 365-day years, was being calculated when during those times they calculated 360-day years. And so in the books of the Bible and all that, dating how many years and what such and such year of the reign of so-and-so, you can't use 365-day years. We should adjust for the differences in days per year. In the Julian calendar calculations, they have surmised that the first year of King Cyrus to be 536 BC. In the math, we calculate 536 minus 46 to come up with 490 years, right? Between the years that had began to calculate years in 365-day years. Back to the year of King Cyrus's first year, right? 490 years multiplied times 365-day years is 178,850 days. The 490 years multiplied times 360-day years equals 176,400, right? So you subtract 176,400 from 178,850 equals 2,450 days, which needs to be subtracted from the 436 BC of the Julian calendar. 2,450 days divided by 360 days equals 6.8 or 7 years, rounded up. All right, so 536 BC minus 7 equals 529 BC is when King Cyrus began his reign and made his declaration, the decree from Isaiah 44. Right? That was the beginning of his reign, and his decree to build the temple in Jerusalem. 529 BC minus the 49 years of the 70-year prophecy of Daniel, the 7 weeks, the first 7 weeks, 49 years. That equals 480 BC. This will be the same year which King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes I, began to reign. Then subtract the 70-year interim period, delay, in the 70 weeks prophecy. 480 BC minus 70 equals 410 BC, which the temple resumed its construction and began the next 62 weeks of the 70-week prophecy at that point, when the temple started construction again. This would be the second year of King Darius II. Okay, where did I get that? Boy. It's in my previous videos. I should have put it here. Why didn't I? I bet you it comes up here. 62 weeks of years should be subtracted from 410 BC. 62 times 7 equals 434 years. Right? 410 BC minus 434 years equals AD 23, subtracting year for the 0 year, right? When Messiah would ride into Jerusalem, right? Now, all the timekeeping and everything has all been frustrating because of non-believing Jews. The beginning of the 62 years, Daniel 9:25, is the key to the coming of Messiah. It is my understanding that Jewish scribes, priests, and Pharisees have tainted the calculation of the year of the entry into Jerusalem by Messiah. They had evil in their hearts and had conspired with their powers that they were calculating the dates of the historical timekeeping to prevent anyone from correlating the day of Messiah's entry into Jerusalem. Thus, the deception has continued to the current day. It is not likely that anyone can properly look back in time to accurately calculate the exact year of entry of Messiah into Jerusalem. Okay? It's because they, being non-believers and, oh, that's blasphemy, he's not God, we're going to change timekeeping so that no one can figure that he was supposed to arrive on this day that he actually did. And so they tainted it. So no one in Israel, or nobody even anywhere, could say, when was it that the Lord wrote in? Let's calculate this. Well, it was all put in askew. We couldn't figure it out. That's why it's in debate, in dispute in our modern world. Nobody can, because they tainted it back then in their originations of the timekeeping of AD and BC. The non-believing Jews had all the influence in calculating this. All right. The Lord was not only provided the exact year which Messiah would ride into Jerusalem, but also provided them with the exact day. There was a command from God to celebrate the feast of Passover every year ever since the time of Moses. God prophesied to Israel to be looking forward to the Messiah while celebrating the feast days. The Jews just didn't get it. The feast days were linked to Messiah. Exodus 12:3-6. I need to read this to you so you can understand the date of entry. Okay? Speak you unto the congregation of Israel, saying that in the 10th day of the month they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of the father, a lamb for an house, and if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your account for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish and male of the first year. You shall take it out from the sheep and from the goats. And you shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, Nisan. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening, the Passover lamb. Jesus is the Passover lamb. Are you starting to understand this? What was the 10th day of Nisan, 4 days before? His entry into Jerusalem, riding the foal of an ass. Notice how Israel brought a lamb without blemish into the house. They treated it as a pet for 4 days, until the 14th day of the month. The 14th day of that month, Nisan, is the feast of Passover. The Passover lamb lived with them for 4 days. This lamb, living in the home from the 10th day of the month Nisan to the 14th day, is a reflection of the glorious entry into Jerusalem by Jesus Christ on Palm Sunday. Jesus had dwelt among the people as a Passover Lamb of God the entire 4 days before the Feast of Passover. Nisan 10 was the day that Jesus had entered into Jerusalem while riding the fall of an ass. Okay? No, but no pastors ever taught you that. They walk blindly. Jesus made a statement in Luke 19 as he rode into the city. He implied that the city should have known the exact day in which he was going to visit. The exact day. They should have known that day. Nisan 10. Luke 19:41 through 44. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, If you had known, even you, at least in your day, the things which belong unto your peace, but now they are hid from your eyes. For the days shall come upon you, that your enemies shall cast a trench around you, and compass you around, and keep you on every side, and shall lay you with the ground, and your children with you, and you shall not leave in you one stone upon another, because you knew not the time of your visitation. Him riding in on the fall of an ass. And then the destruction that he's cursing them with is the Roman invasion in AD 70, right? Some 40 years later. All right. Luke 19:41 through 44 statement by Jesus as he rode upon the foal of an ass became fulfilled upon the Roman invasion of Jerusalem in AD 70. I keep doing this to myself. I keep pre-telling you. All right, verse 10. And I'll cut off the chariots from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem. The battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen, and his dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river even to the ends of the earth. The chariot represents imagery of war, which are pulled by horses. Horses are allegorical spiritual movements, as per Zechariah 6:1 through 5, if you're curious on where I got that. Which in this case are looking towards a spiritual movement of war. Now, the battle bow is, in addition, allegorically representation of war manipulated by the weapon. Revelation 6:1, you can see that from that horse, the first white horse. The tribe of Ephraim represents the northern kingdom of Israel when they had been divided from Judah and Jerusalem. All right, Psalm 20 verse 7 says, Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we remember the name of our Lord our God. Before the Assyrian and Babylonian captivities, Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, were continuously at war between each other and other surrounding kingdoms. Since the previous verse looked forward to the entry into Jerusalem by Messiah, that he referenced here refers the he, pronoun he, referenced here back to Messiah in verse 9. In addition, and to Messiah coming to Jerusalem, he shall cut off war and the retaliation of war. He shall also speak peace to the heathen. Matthew 5:9 says, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Jesus had taught to turn the other cheek and to forgive your enemies, which was contrary to what Israel and Judah were accustomed to. All right, the earth is a spherical globe, which east and west never meet. The seas of the earth go from one sea to the other, always are connected one to the other, and his dominion shall be from sea even to sea. Right? Around the globe. The kingdom of Messiah Jesus will be extended from the Euphrates River, where sin began, until the ends of the earth, and from the river even to the ends of the earth. What river? From Euphrates to the ends of the earth. In Daniel 2, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar revealed the mountain, which represented God's kingdom. It shall destroy all the kingdoms of the earth and will stand through all of eternity. And here is Daniel 2:44 through 45. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. These kingdoms being the great kingdoms of that statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamt about. His kingdom being one of them. For as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, because they usually worshipped idols with their hands. They made idols with their hands. This mountain was cut out of mountains without hands. No hands involved in cutting that mountain out. and that it break into pieces the iron, the brass, of the clay, and the silver, and the gold. The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and interpretation thereof sure. All right, that's a prophecy of Christ's kingdom. Verse 11, as for you also, by the blood of your covenant, I have sent forth your prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. After speaking of his kingdom, the entire earth, the Lord spoke through Zechariah and points to the children of Israel. As for you also. The covenant spoken of is not to the Mosaic covenant, where there sacrificed lambs and goats, but the blood of Christ and a new covenant, by the blood of your covenant. What's the blood of our covenant? The blood of Christ is the blood of our covenant. Through the blood of the old covenant, the dead saints would go to a place called Sheol, the pit wherein there is no water. Okay, let me back up. He is talking about the old covenant. My bad. It's been, I don't know, 6 months since I wrote this. Through the blood of the old covenant, the dead saints would go to the place called Sheol, the pit where there is no water. All right? Where they would wait for the Messiah to come and redeem them of their sins. As King David praised God that he would not leave him in hell, Sheol, he revealed that God's Holy One, Messiah, would not see corruption. Right? He was raised from the dead. This was an amazing indication that Messiah would experience death, but God would not let him remain there in corruption. It was Jesus the Messiah who went to hell in order to gather the righteous Old Testament saints and led them from captivity unto victory. He went down to hell for one purpose: bring my saints who've been waiting for me up out of here and take them to heaven, because I have died for your sins finally. I mean, you've been waiting. All right, Psalm 16, 9 through 10. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoices. My flesh also shall rest in hope. And you wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither will you suffer your Holy One to see corruption. That's the psalm that David wrote. King David's heart was glad and rejoiced because his dead flesh would not remain in the pit of hell forever. Because Jesus, during that 3 days, from his death on the cross, his burial, until his resurrection, it was 3 days. 3 days and 3 nights, right? He went to hell. There's David and Solomon. I don't know about Solomon. Isaiah, Jeremiah, all of them there, waiting for their Messiah. There's Jesus. Hey, I'm here. Come on, guys. We're going to resurrect. And he resurrected them along with himself. When Jesus spoke of the rich man and Lazarus, he told of the two-compartment place called Sheol, where one side was hot, dry, and painful. The other side was called Abraham's bosom, where Lazarus rested in the bosom of Abraham. This place was pleasant for the Old Testament saints to stay while they waited for the Messiah to come and lead them to heaven in victory. Okay? And then you can read Luke 16, 22 through 24. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip his finger in the water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in the flame. Notice that Lazarus has water, and Abraham, but the rich man didn't. He was in the bad side of hell. But the blood of the new covenant, the Lord had sent forth Israel's prisoners out of hell, the pit where there is no water. Since the resurrection of Christ, the righteous no longer go to Abraham's bosom, but go straight to heaven to be with the Lord. All right. 2 Corinthians 5:8, Paul wrote, "We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord." Right? As soon as we are absent from the body, we're with the Lord. All right. By the blood of your covenant, I have sent forth your prisoners out of the pit wherein there is no water. All right. I may have been right. Thinking back then, I was fearing that I was twisting it, but I was not. By the blood of your covenant, I have sent forth your prisoners out of the pit of hell. The blood of the new covenant. Right? So I was right. I was panicking, thinking that I'm sorry. an author that's not remembering correctly what he wrote 6 months before. I know a lot of theology, and then I'm writing books and what have you, and this verse says this, and I interpret it right because I'm breaking it down. Boy, I'm in depth. I'm breaking it down, and then 6 months later, I'm trying to read it, and I'm reading it to you, and I'm thinking, oh, did I just tell them wrong? No, I didn't. I was telling you right, and I thought I was telling wrong, and I actually was right. All right, Ephesians 4:8-10. Wherefore he says, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth, Sheol? He that descended is the same that also ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. Sits at the right hand of the Father, fulfills all things. All right. Zechariah 9:12. Turn you to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto you. No longer will the righteous have to be prisoners of the hope. Right? God would not leave them in hell. Psalm 16:9-10. The stronghold is Christ as the Redeemer of his people, who will hold his salvation in his hands. In the days of this gospel was preached to the Jews before Christ came, their hope was to look forward to his coming. The motivation to build the temple was the hope that he would soon come. They had not realized that it would be another 4 centuries before the Messiah would come to them. Now, obviously, Zechariah and Haggai are encouraging the children of Israel to keep building the temple. Got to build the temple so the Messiah can come. Right? But the hope had to be preached by Zechariah and Haggai, that their patience of hope was vital to their survival. Now, his promise was double the grace than what they were given during the Old Covenant. God's grace will be in abundance once Messiah has brought them salvation. Isaiah 53:11. He shall know you in the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Zechariah 9:13. When I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up the sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and made you as the sword of mighty men. Judah was the bow, and the Lord filled the bow with Ephraim as the arrows. The Lord united the northern kingdom, Ephraim, with the southern kingdom, Judah, and motivated them to defend the Mosaic covenant and the temple of God. He brought his children of the believing Israel to defend the Mosaic covenant against the likes of Greece, the Seleucids, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, right? Daniel 11:32 says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Right? So in Daniel, back in the 7th century BC, told of the same thing of what Zechariah was saying. The statement of Daniel 11:2, which says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries, refers to the Sadducees, who were the collaborators with Antiochus IV Epiphanes. They were most likely assisted in this horrible day, which fell upon Jerusalem. These were Jews who were as Hellenistic as Antiochus IV was. They were probably praised by Antiochus. Shall he corrupt by flatteries? You guys are doing a good job. While they performed the wicked deeds against the Jewish people who were loyal to God and his Mosaic covenant. Right? The second half of Daniel 11:32 refers to the rebellion that arose by those who were loyal to God and his holy covenant. This was the beginning of the Hasmonean dynasty, which started with Mattathias Jehoram. Shortly after the revolt against Antiochus IV Epiphanes began, Mattathias died, and his son Judas led the rebellion again, along with his 4 brothers. Judas was known as Judas Maccabeus, and then began the reign of the Maccabees. Right? Daniel was given a prophecy of the rising of the Maccabees, right? Who would begin to rise to power of the Hasmonean rulers, who would reign over Judea until the arrival of Messiah. But the people that do know their God shall do exploits. Right? 1 Maccabees 2:14 says, in their grief Mattathias and his sons tore their clothes and put on sackcloth and continued in deep mourning. Then Mattathias went through the town shouting, "Everyone who is faithful to God's covenant and obeys his law, follow me." With this, he and his sons fled to the mountains, leaving behind all they owned. You can read that in 1 Maccabees 2:27. Mattathias and his sons had followers who fled to the mountains, while the others had awakened to realize that their loyalty to Yahweh was worth dying for. Daniel 11:33 says, "And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by the captivity and by spoils by many days." Mattathias and his sons made great effort to advise those in Jerusalem to resist the demands of Antiochus and his leaders, who were insisting for them to forget their loyalty to Yahweh and to worship the Hellenistic gods. The soldiers attacked them immediately, but the Jews did nothing to resist. They did not even throw stones or block the entrances to the caves where they were hiding. So the enemy attacked them on the Sabbath and killed the men, their wives, their children, and their livestock. 1,000 people died. You can read that in 1 Maccabees 2:35 and 38. As one reads the historical writings, they will see that Mattathias, his sons, and his friends were joined by a group of devout, patriotic Jews. "And raised up your sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as a sword of a mighty man." See how Zechariah is prophesying of the Maccabees also, right? Again, here. Hearing of the revolt, Antiochus sent his men to punish the rebels and slaughter many who did not even defend themselves. This was to go on for many days until Mattathias and his rebels came forth into Jerusalem and destroyed the pagan altars and killed the traitorous Jews. Daniel 11:34 says, "Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries." So Daniel 11:34 implies that the Jews would receive help from the Maccabees, and that there would be many who would be two-faced about their loyalty to Yahweh and his covenant. As they would agree with the rebellion, they would then turn their backs on the faithful when they faced actual persecution. Sounds like a lukewarm Christian of today. They're a Christian until things get tough. Then they aren't, because they're not really Christian. Then Mattathias and his friends were joined by a group of devout and patriotic Jews, the strongest and bravest men in Israel, who had all volunteered to defend the law. In addition, everyone who was fleeing from the persecution joined them and strengthened their forces. Now that they had an army, they gave vent to their anger by attacking the renegade Jews. Those who escaped were forced to flee to the Gentiles for safety. Mattathias and his friends went everywhere, tearing down pagan altars and circumcising by force every uncircumcised boy they found within the borders of Israel. They were also successful in hunting down the arrogant Gentile officials. They rescued the law of Moses from the Gentiles and their kings, and broke the power of the wicked king Antiochus. That's 1 Maccabees 2:42 through 48. All right, so you can see how the Maccabees reads. It reads as a history book, doesn't it? Verse 14, "And the Lord shall be seen over them, and his arrow shall go forth as the lightning, and the Lord God shall blow the trumpet, and shall go with the whirlwinds of the south." The Maccabees had defended Judea against Antiochus IV Epiphanes and succeeded. Antiochus IV died a sudden death. Many will say that it was a supernatural judgment by God, who put him through a painful, slow death. You can read of that death in 2 Maccabees 9:4 through 10. It is easy to see while looking back that the Lord was over the Maccabees and the children of Zion, who fought against their enemies of Hellenism. The reason that many of the persecuted Jews had turned and began to fight back was the realization that God's hand was at work. The arm of the Lord was seen, going forth as a figurative arrow of lightning. It's figurative, allegorical. As the Jews stood their ground and fought against the pagan idolatry, God blew his trumpet through Mattathias and his sons, the Maccabees. The Lord used a metaphor that he has used in the past, referring to a strong blowing south desert wind. As he manifested the strong military advancement of the Median and Persians against Babylon in Isaiah 21:1, so he will have used the same power of force when referring to the south winds of Israel over the northern Seleucids. Right? And shall go with the whirlwinds of the south. So God's using some imagery, some allegory in that verse, talking about the power that he's given the Maccabees. Now, verse 15, the Lord of hosts shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue with sling stones, and they shall drink and make noise as through wine, and they shall be filled with like bowls and as corners of the altar. The Lord has declared that he will defend the city of Jerusalem for his servant David's sake in Isaiah 37:5, 37:35, 38 verse 6, 2 Kings 19:34, 20 verse 6, and Zechariah 12:8. It is a personal matter which goes even back to God's promise to Abraham and in Genesis 15:1. The Lord of hosts shall defend them. The Lord would have defended Jerusalem even while using sticks and stones. In this case, he declared slingshots, which the military of the Seleucids had much heavier firepower. The advantage was clearly on Israel. I need to get rid of that word "the," since the God of heaven was on their side. So you see where I'm going with that? The Seleucids had much heavier firepower than slingshots, but Israel had the advantage since God of heaven was on their side. I think that's great. As David defeated Goliath with a slingshot and stones, so will Israel defeat their foes. Right? In victory, Israel will celebrate by drinking a wine and make a noise of celebrating victory. Hurrah! Right? Make a noise as through wine. Because the Lord's enemies will fall to his divine justice, their blood was to be in abundance, as filling the bowls and the blood sacrifices in the corners of the altar. You can see that in Exodus 24:6. This was to be God's blood sacrifice of his wicked enemies, Hellenism. Right? And they shall be filled like bowls at the corner of the altar. God has sacrifice of his enemies, and their blood is a sacrifice. It's a blood sacrifice when the Lord destroys the enemies. Zechariah 9:16. And the Lord their God shall save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they shall be as the stones of a crown, lifted up as an ensign upon his land. The remaining remnant left in Jerusalem were to be God's glorious stones in his crown. The Lord saved them for a specific purpose, which had been lifted up as a beacon to his people in the future. From the historic victory of the Maccabees and the people of Israel who fought alongside of them comes a significant annual celebration called Hanukkah. Lifted up my ensign upon his land. The ensign is the celebration of Hanukkah. The feast of dedication, Hanukkah, was not to be a feast of the Lord to be celebrated annually according to the laws of Moses, but because John had acknowledged it within his gospel, John 10 verse 22, it must be assumed to be significant. Right? The 8-day festival beginning in Kislev 25, which is November and December, commemorates the rededication of the temple in 164 BC by Judas Maccabeus. The Feast of Dedication does have prophetic significance. Daniel 12:12 says, "Blessed he that waits and comes on the 1,305 and 30 days." All right? The Feast of Atonement will be the start of the 70th week of Daniel, as well as the day of Jesus Christ's return, 2,520 days later. This will be 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation. Right? The Feast of Atonement is celebrated every year on Tishri 10. The Feast of Tabernacles is 5 days later, between Tishri 15 and 22. Exactly 75 days after the Feast of Atonement is the first day of Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, which is Kislev 25. So, 1,260 days since the abomination of desolation to the day of the coming of the Lord, plus 75 days equals 1,335 days. Wow, the math works out perfectly. Gee, what a coincidence. Since that's going to be the time when the the temple of the millennial kingdom will be rededicated. It will be the official rededication of the millennial kingdom's temple on Kislev 25, 1335 days after the abomination of desolation. Knowing that the rededication of the temple is 75 days after Christ's return, one should realize that the temple must be cleansed first because of the abomination of desolation. The cleansing of the temple, in you'll see that in Numbers 19, 1 through 10, and Ezekiel 43, 18 through 24, will occur 1,300 days from the halfway point of the 7 years. Jesus Christ will return 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation and will set up his millennial kingdom. 1,300 minus 1,260 equals 40 days after Christ arrives. Jerusalem and the temple will be repaired and the temple cleansed. The cleansing of the temple happens after 40 days. 35 days later, after the temple is cleansed, will be the Feast of Rededication, which is 75 days after Christ returns. All right? Hopefully you're understanding that. You can replay this again. Verse 17, for how great is the goodness and how great is his beauty. Corn shall make the young men cheerful, and new wine the maids. This emanates the goodness of the Lord and the greatness of his beauty. God is the only one good, the only one good, and no one compares to him but that between Father and Son. The translators have used the word beauty for the Hebrew word yofi, which is defined as splendor and brightness. How great is the Lord's splendor and brightness? In Genesis 1:3, the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light, which was his light. The luminaries had not been created at that time, right? The luminaries were created here. So no, he didn't flip on a light switch. Well, allegorically he did. So his light was the only light available at the moment in time. His light. And his light, he didn't just, hey, I'm going to have light now. I'm going to give myself light. His light's always been there. So why is it let there be light and then there was light? What happened? Well, here's a Genesis lesson. In Genesis 1:3, the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light, right? So the light was the only light available at the moment at the time. His light is so magnificent and his splendor is unfathomable. Messiah is later called beauty in Zechariah 11:7 and 10. 11:7, verse 7, and verse 10, which has a tremendous theological significance. When the Lord speaks of grain, corn, and wine, he speaks of times of prosperity. You can see that here. This moves to the millennial kingdom, where Zion will flourish with prosperity because the Lord will be with them. Corn shall make the young men cheerful, and new wine the maids. Isaiah 62:8 says, the Lord has sworn by his right hand and by the arm of his strength, surely I will no more give thy corn to be meat for your enemies, and the sons of the strangers shall not drink your wine, for the which you have labored. Right? Amen. And that's the end of chapter 9. Great chapter. A lot of theology that needed to be understood. A lot of prophecy that became fulfilled that we now have history books to confirm. The Maccabees is a history book. We can confirm it there. Flavius Josephus is another place we can confirm that. But we have history to look back on the fulfillment of the prophecy here in Zechariah 9. Okay, it's wonderful. So listen to it again, read it through again, go through it slowly, understand it. It's important to know. Chapter 10 is going to roll right in with some new information. Zechariah is giving you all kinds of theology here. So hopefully you've understood this. Please hit like down below and subscribe to my channel. And until the next time, may God bless you all.